Because if there's one thing Gothic heroines love more than anything, it's a brooding aristocrat with trauma issues. Hello out there to all of you seekers of literary luxury, and welcome to my channel, where I sit amongst my dolls for no good reason and talk about the books I like. My name is Daniel, and I am the Barbie Book Boy. Today, we are going down a gloriously Gothic adventure of magical malarkey by discussing a little jewel of a book called Tea and Alchemy by Sharon Lynn Fisher. So brew yourself some breakfast blend and let's get into it. Welcome to the fog-shrouded wilds of Cornwall, birthplace of the Cornish game hen. The year was 1854, and the good people of Roche are trapped beneath the shadow of infamous Roche Rock. Now, the author was keen to let us know that Roche Rock is indeed a real place, and she instructed us to search Roche Rock and you'll easily find it. So I prepped my little typing thumbs and I went and tickled the Google. You're welcome. So Roche Rock is a 66-foot tall stone outcrop of black granite with a 15th century chapel built on top of it. And if that isn't the stuff of Gothic dreams, then her name isn't Mariah. So, if you can imagine, this spooky spectacle has inspired a slew of stories and rumors over the centuries. Things like tales of fairies and demons and all sorts of supernatural shenanigans that creep out the Cornish. And for the folks in this book, there's a healthy dose of fear and suspicion for the hermit that lives up there. Sort of like the Victorian Cornish equivalent of the creepy house on your block. But for Mina Penrose, it's just a part of the daily scenery on her walks to and from work at a tea house called the Magpie, which is an interesting name for a business considering that a lone magpie is considered a bad omen. And you wouldn't want to name a business after a bad omen, right? But magpie superstitions is actually something that I learned about while reading this book. I had no idea about all the crazy superstitions around these busy little birds. But again, I tickled the Google and I found this cute little nursery rhyme for magpie sightings. And it goes a little something like this. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, 7 for a secret never to be told. There are several verses across several various versions, so do with that what you will. Anyway, back to the book. So Mina really loves her job at the Magpie, mostly because her personal life is sort of stagnant at the moment, kind of like a forgotten pot of tea. And working at the Magpie helps her to forget some of her loneliness, and it helps to keep her mind off of her grief. But it's also through working at this charming little oasis of tea that she begins seeing things in the used tea leaves of customers. Mina can actually squint at the scraps of soggy swirls in the bottom of teacups and make out the ominous shapes of things like wolves and knives. It's a practice called tasseography, most likely one that she inherited from her late mother. And though this ability has seemingly bloomed out of nowhere, she doesn't really have the time to wrap her head around it or what it means, before she finds a dead man in the heath one night on her walk home from work. If you're an uncultured Yank like me, heath refers to the uncultivated land with the characteristic vegetation of heather. So basically just an overgrown field. But it comes up a lot in this book, so I felt the need to kind of explain that to you. I didn't know what it was, I had to look it up. Anyway, well, that's all it takes, right? One random dead guy in the heath, and everyone is all, ooh, it must be the hermit who lives up on the creepy Gothic church rock. I mean, he's a loner. He lives on a rock, and no one ever sees him. I don't need a cup of Earl Grey to spell it out for me. Do you guys think the invention of alphabet soup really hurt the tea leaf reading market. Anyway, this hermit, named Harker Tregarick, seemingly never leaves the grounds of his musty old estate. So it was a total freakout when, after the murder, he wandered into the Magpie one day for a cuppa. And for a recluse who's suspected of murder, he's kind of a handsome little fella. And Mina, by the way, can we all just take a second to acknowledge that the two main characters in this book are named Mina and Harker? Can you think of any other famous book that made use of those two specific names? Maybe? Yeah, just let that steep in your mind for a good 4 to 6 minutes before serving. Anyway, Mina is intrigued. And who wouldn't be? I mean, it's 1854 and her greatest source of entertainment thus far is staring into the bottom of teacups. So Harker Tregarick waltzing into the Magpie one day after she finds a dead guy in the heath must have been like the moon landing for her. And Mina excitedly knows that everything in her world is about to change. And as far as she's concerned, the changes can't come soon enough. Even if those changes are tinged with hints of danger and potential personal injury. Because if there's one thing Gothic heroines love more than anything, it's a brooding aristocrat with trauma issues. So now, Mina has to navigate this new world of suspense and intrigue, all while being sure she doesn't miss tea time. And that's basically the story of Tea and Alchemy by Sharon Lynn Fisher. So what are my thoughts? Well, as you clever little sleuths may have already deduced, this book does share some DNA with Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, it's not quite fan fiction, but there are some elements that are seemingly inspired from that old classic vampire romp of romps. The first obviously being the use of the names Mina and Harker. But the book doesn't rely on its Dracula DNA for brewing. It's not asking us to accept any nepotism. Tea and Alchemy knows that the book Dracula exists, and it tips its hat politely in Dracula's direction, and then goes about its own very specific, very Gothic business. The book borrows similar concepts from Dracula. Things like restraint, secrecy, bodily anxiety, inherited darkness, basically all the hallmarks of the Victorian era that we rely on. But it does not borrow narrative, structure, pacing, or goals. There's no sense that the story is trying to recreate any iconic Dracula scenes. It's not trying to remix any famous moments, and it isn't trying to trade on brand recognition. Instead, it uses these Gothic tropes as a sort of shorthand, so it can get on with what it actually wants to explore, which is its own story and characters. Like spunky little Miss Mina, who's interpretive and smart. She notices patterns. I mean, obviously, she's a tasseographer, but she listens too. She's the type of person who sits with uncertainty instead of just immediately trying to conquer it. And that makes her particularly well suited to a story where the danger isn't always immediately identifiable. And it makes her uniquely suited to dealing with Harker Tregarick, because not every woman would be willing to tolerate his angsty, aristocratic, alchemical idiosyncrasies. See, we have a bit of a Beauty and the Beast situation here. Not so much in the sense that Harker is a brute, but in the sense that due to his nature, he's a ticking time bomb, and as such he can be a little sulky and a little surly. Harker has alchemized his feelings down to their very essence, and he spends every day up there just in his giant rock like some Victorian gargoyle, just steeping in all of his emotions like a soggy bag of Earl Grey. And for whatever reason, that really gets Mina going. But hey, to each heroine her own, I always say. See, Harker has fooled himself into thinking that he's achieved some kind of balance. And then along comes Mina to let him know that he has been steeping quite long enough, thank you very much. And she would know. She's a professional tea barista with a penchant for tasseography. Mina understands tannins. She knows that bitterness doesn't necessarily mean that something is ruined. It just means it needs a little milk, possibly sugar, and definitely some company. But their wackadoodle courtship is accelerated by some unknown enterprising entity that's threatening both of their lives. So beyond all of the obvious Victorian pining for any peek at some lascivious lace, they're sort of forced together as this ragtag team of unlikely allies. I mean, here they are in the midst of their little delicate emotional dance, and the heath is in the background all, hello, I'm over here too, I'm also a problem. So what you end up with is this wonderfully unhinged triangle, with Mina being all quietly competent and just eagerly trying to problem solve. And then there's Harker, who's a walking vial of distilled sorrow with a touch of danger. And then there's the Heath, which is playing host to a cryptid that just keeps interrupting their flow. It's gothic tension at its finest, and I loved it. I loved it. So there you have it, some of my thoughts on Tea and Alchemy by Sharon Lynn Fisher, a book about brewing a cup of divination devilry, an alchemical adventure of audacious acrobatics in Victorian propriety, a Victorian volcano of vampire vigor. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to be doing these little book reviews weekly, so if this is your thing, then stay tuned. Oh, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Leave a comment if you plan on reading this book. Leave me a comment if you've already read it and had some thoughts. Share your own anecdotes in tassiography if you got them. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's tea time, and I need the leaves to tell me what I should make for dinner, so I gotta skedaddle. See you next time.